Hey guys, it's Mr. Valenzuela again, coming to you from virtual reality. Of course, you probably know by now I'm absent today, but hopefully I can still explain Keynesian economics to you in my absence. So when we left off yesterday, we were talking about the contributions of John Maynard Keynes to the economy. And remember, he observed that sometimes an economy can be stuck in a recession, and if the economy can be stuck in a recession because wages and prices don't change, then he advocated, if you're in that scenario, that government intervention can stimulate aggregate demand, and it can be two ways that can happen. First of all, a change in government spending, which directly affects aggregate demand. The second thing is a change in taxes can indirectly affect aggregate demand by first changing people's disposable income and then changing people's consumption. So the government has two big tools to change the economy. First is their spending and taxes. And that's what governments do, tax and spend. That's the biggest ways they can influence the economy. All right, so if you recall this, the question now is, how does this work? And what I'd like to do is I'd like to explain to you how this stimulation works. I'd like to explain that to you. And I'd like to explain it to you conceptually, and then I'll teach you the math. And then hopefully that'll reinforce the concept. So let's get back to the circular flow of the economy. In the circular flow of the economy, remember, it's a model of spending. You have people and you have business firms here. And what John Maynard Keynes realized, most people do, is that the money you spend is the money you earn, which becomes the money you spend, which becomes the money you earn. So if the government were to intervene in the economy, say by giving a check or a tax cut to a business, then this money that the government adds in would then circulate around the circular flow of the economy. So if the government gives business firms a tax break to produce something, then business firms would hire more people, and those people would in turn earn income, which they would spend at businesses, which of course businesses would use to hire more people. Alternatively, if the government just bought stuff from people, crops, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurial ability, if the government just bought stuff from people, people would have money, and people would use that money mostly to spend, and then business firms would have money to hire, which would increase spending, which would increase hiring. So we have is what's called a virtuous spiral, The good here creates good here, which in turn positively reinforces the good here. Where we have a positively reinforcing loop. This causes more of this, which causes more of this. So if this makes sense to you conceptually, you should be good. Just try to keep in mind, when you spend money, it affects people's income. And so the more money you spend, the more income people earn. And probably a good example would be going to a garage sale. Has anyone here been to a garage sale? Yeah? See? Okay, good. Well, let's say you go to a garage sale and you spend $10. That $10 becomes someone's income, which becomes their ability. They can then spend $10, and it goes on and on and on. So where does this circle end? Well, that's where the math comes in. The math helps us understand how much spending changes. And so here's the two things that John Maynard Keynes used to help measure what was happening. He used this idea called the MPC and the NPS. The MPC and the NPS simply stand for marginal propensity. In this case, the marginal propensity to consume. In this case, the marginal propensity to save. Now, in either case, these are fancy words for saying how likely are you to spend money, how likely are you to save money. Okay, if you get a pay raise, how much of it will you spend? How much of it will you save? And by measuring these types of behaviors in people, John Maynard Keynes could figure out how much would go through the circular flow of the economy. So here's how to calculate marginal propensity to consume and marginal propensity to save. The marginal propensity to consume is just the ratio of how much spending you do out of a change in income. And the marginal propensity to save is simply a ratio of how much saving you do when you have a change in income. So for example here, let's say that someone earns a $1,000 bonus. And we're going to use that as our example. So let's say the change in income is $1,000. and out of this $1,000, someone spends 800 of it. Well, you spent 800 of your 1,000. Your marginal propensity to consume is 8/10, or we'd say 80%, or it would be easier to write 0.8. Now, what'd you do with the $200 you didn't spend? Well, if the only thing you can do in this world is spend money or save money, the $200 you didn't spend becomes savings. And really, that's all savings is. Savings is money you don't spend. So, your marginal propensity to consume is 8.8, 80%, and your marginal propensity to save is 200 divided by 1,000, or 20%. What it's basically saying is, every time you get a pay raise, you're going to spend 80% of it, you're going to save 20% of it. No matter what it is, though, all of this is going to equal to 100%. So the marginal propensity to save and marginal propensity to consume is always going to add up to 1 or 100%. By understanding people's behavior when they get more money, we can figure out how much they'll spend and how much income will be created, which creates more spending, and so on and so on. But you have to understand conceptually first this. Your spending becomes someone's income. Whatever money you spend money at Burger King, someone gets paid for that. You spend money at Old Navy, someone got paid to help create the clothes and sell the clothes and market the clothes and write those cool commercials. This is how we measure those changes. This is how we measure people's behavior. Okay? Okay, so once you know this, now this is only step 1 of the math. I'm sorry to say, this is only step 1 of the math, but just remember how much I spend of my total, if you get an allowance, like how much do you spend of your allowance? That's kind of your NPC. How much do you save out of your allowance? Yeah, right, you don't save. Come on. That is then useful figuring out this, the Keynesian multiplier. Here's where it all comes down. This mathematical formula helps us understand when there is a change in spending, how much will that spending change aggregate demand? So when the government increases spending, how do people behave? How much does GDP change? And this is, let me walk you through the formula. A change in spending, remember delta is that universal symbol for change in. A change in spending times this formula right here with this little algorithmic formula for figuring out how much spending changes things. So the change in spending times 1 divided by 1 minus the MPC equals the total change in aggregate demand and GDP, and of course there's also a change in unemployment with that too. So we call this formula right here, 1 divided by 1 minus the MPC, we call this the Keynesian multiplier, right here. This is the Keynesian multiplier, and this is how it's useful. The Keynesian multiplier is useful for us to understand when there's a change in spending, how much does it change in total aggregate demand. So, let's think about this Keynesian multiplier. What it's basically saying, if the government gives people $10, say the government writes you a check for $10 because it's scared the economy's going to slow down. So the government sends you $10. Here's your $10. Your marginal propensity to consume is 0.9. Your marginal propensity to save equals 0.1. So you get this $10, and you're going to spend 90% of this $10. So the government adds $10 to your pocket. You spend $9, right? Your $9 is GDP. So the GDP is going to increase by $9, plus 9. But then that spending becomes someone else's income. Business firms may spend 90% too. So now business firms send that money back, and people have $9, and people are going to spend, let's say the next guy spends 90% of $9. So 9 times 9 is 8.1. So you spent $9. So now someone else is going to spend $8.10. Business firms send that back around. And the next person's going to spend $7.20. And the next person's going to spend $6.30. Every time it goes around, people are spending 90% of it and saving 10% of it. So when the government increases spending by $10, it increases the economy by $9 plus $8.10 plus $7.20 plus $6.30 plus $5.40 plus, what's next? $4.50. So continuously, and you've got to add these up, $4.50. Well, you don't have to add these up. This is the dumb way of doing it. Okay? But conceptually, just understand. The government gives you 10 bucks. You spend 90% of it, comes back around. You spend 90% of that, comes back around. You spend 90% of that. So it's 90% of 10, 90% of what's left, 90% of that, 90% of that, 90% of that. Go on, add infinitum. We don't want to do that. That's crap. You can do it that way. This way is better. So in this way, we have the Keynesian multiplier. And what we saw over there was $10 increase in spending. Well, here's how it works. The government increased spending by $10 times 1 divided by 1 minus the MPC. The MPC in this case is 0.9. Remember, you spend 90% of your income. Now, what's 1 minus 0.9? Very good, it's 0.1. And 1 divided by 0.1, how many times does 1/10 go into 1? 10 times, very good. So the government's going to increase spending by $10 multiplied by 10. 10 times 10, this $10 the government spends is going to make the economy grow by $100. That's right. That's called the expansion multiplier, the spending multiplier, but I refer to call it by its original name, the Keynesian multiplier. Is it still recording?